If you're anything like me, and I suspect you might be, you're probably thinking something like, that's great and all, Row, but that seems like an exceedingly simple model to account for the infinite complexity of plot across the entire body of human literature. You're only talking about one silly little banana story. You're right, again, of course, and wrong. If we're being precise, and you know we are, there's a missing piece. You probably already have a sense for what it is, and maybe you've already figured out how to get around that. But we're going to be thorough and make sure you're not missing any pieces. This is your writer's toolbox we're talking about here. Ro's not going to mess around. I've told you over and over again how geeky and pedantic and tedious narrative theorists can be, and I've certainly given you plenty of examples of how I am, my God. But there's one example that always gets me. If you go looking for a book on plot, like I've done many times, shocker, it will take exactly 1 second for you to spot at least 3 books telling you exactly how many plots there are. The 13 plots and their deeper significance. 46 essential plots and how to use them. The 6 universal plots and exploration of story across cultures. Okay, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, or perhaps cheeky, but there's some truth in it. For some reason, theorists love counting plots. It's just their way of trying to categorize and draw useful inferences, which, as we've seen, can tell us a lot about how stories work. But the answer to the how many plots question is blatantly obvious. There are infinite plots. Fiction is a combinatorial system. One look at 1001 Arabian Nights makes this clear. There's also another answer to that question that narrative theorists not only aren't going to like, but they're going to hate it so much Roe might just become the scholar who shall not be named. Which is cool by Roe. There is one plot. There, I said it. Have at me, angry narrative geeks. One plot. What is that plot, Roe, you may ask? Or you may not have to ask at all. You already know it. I showed you in the last lesson. It's suspense cue plus constraints plus resolution. Remember? That's it. Really. Seriously, it's that simple. Well, it's a little more complex, but not much. I used the term combinatorial earlier to describe fiction. If you've studied linguistics or math, you know what I mean. For those of you who haven't, here's what I'm talking about. Sentences have rules. You know them implicitly if you don't already know them explicitly. If you want to improve your standing in that matter, you should learn them explicitly. If you haven't already, you will when we start to talk about text. There are a finite number of moves that I can make to elongate a sentence beyond a subject and predicate, and it's not that many. You could add a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and if you don't know what I mean by this, I'm giving you a great example of this right now. Or you could add a colon or a semicolon and add another coordinate clause. A coordinate clause is one that doesn't depend on another clause. In other words, it could stand on its own. Or, if you're familiar with how to use loose modifiers, you could add another level of fluidity to your sentences, building longer and longer expressions of complexity, happily adding descriptive information to your base clause, your self-esteem rising with each majestic loose modifier you add, cementing your place amongst the literary elite, or pompous more likely. A few simple rules of syntax at the sentence level quickly yield infinite complexity, a combinatorial system. Plot is the same. It's simpler though. You already know the 3 parts. How does that one plot yield all the plots then, Roe? Once you realize this is what's happening, it's not too difficult to see. You might not be able to unsee it. Let's just imagine my chimp story were the opening to a novel about Juby and Cisco. That first complete plot might serve as a nice hook to bring the reader into the story, and if I added a cue or two to signal an attraction between Juby and Cisco, suddenly I've got a suspense cue that wasn't quite tied off in that opening plot. This is one common way that plots get put together. One stretches into the next, a lot like the loose modifiers in my long sentence above. A chain of connecting plots adding up to a much longer story. Many of the series that you see on TV are put together precisely this way, a self-contained episode with suspense cues that refer to a longer story that helps build continuity between mostly self-contained installments. If you weren't aware that was the purpose of those loose threads you absolutely must find out about when the credits roll, I'm sure you were though. but it should be apparent now. This is one of the oldest storytelling tricks of the trade, a technique employed by Scheherazade in 1001 Arabian Nights, in which the princess delays her execution each morning by enchanting the Sultan with a captivating story she cleverly refuses to complete until the following night, when she begins anew by picking up the loose end. These stories are complete plots, linked together by loose ends. Another common method of constructing larger plots is to embed smaller plots within a larger, longer narrative. You're well familiar with this too. One of the most storied narratives of this type is Homer's Odyssey, which, in the opening few lines, cues the audience to Odysseus's goal, to get home to his wife. All the subsequent adventures on his quest, many of which are their own self-contained subplots, serve as constraints to his larger goal, returning home to Penelope before she remarries. During his misadventure with the Cyclops, for instance, the reader is perfectly capable of processing the events as both a present danger, the subplot, and as a constraint of the larger plot, returning home to his wife and estate. These are often referred to as global, the big plot, and local, the subplot. Very often, large-scale epic narratives will weave multiple self-contained plots together into a massive, sweeping tapestry. An excellent example of this type of narrative is Game of Thrones, an epic filled with magnetic plot elements of all stripes. An advantage of having so many parallel plots existing concurrently is that it allows the author to build suspense to different levels in multiple threads. The narrative can build suspense and then leave a thread when the suspense level is high, pausing that thread of the narrative in order to develop another plot thread from inception to climax, then returning to an already developed plot. This way, the level of suspense almost never drops down to zero. An added bonus of such a vast story world is the satisfaction a reader gets from seeing characters from seemingly separate storylines cross paths with other well-known characters from others. A third effect still is that single moves may constrain or resolve multiple subplots simultaneously, yielding higher levels of suspense than a typical constraint or resolution would. When more's at stake, the suspense is higher. Game of Thrones is a marvelous example of combinatorial complexity weaved together underneath the umbrella of a single massing, overlapping plot of mystery and power. Who will ultimately sit on the throne? For most writers, I suspect this will prove a useful framework for thinking about both local, simpler subplots, and global, larger or complex plots, and especially how both fit together. It is an admittedly simple way to look at the content of stories. This is the nature of a combinatorial system, a basic underlying algorithm yielding infinite and beautiful complexity. I suspect some readers, especially the narrative geeks of the world, will look to pull at the seams and find narratives that work and don't follow this pattern. I welcome their input on finding a more useful approach. I've yet to see it. I would also mention that not every sentence is perfectly grammatical, yet still follows the underlying pattern, conveying its meaning, albeit imperfectly. Exceptions no doubt exist, as with any rule or system. A tool in the hand that works 99% of the time is far more useful than the empty hand most narrative theorists propose. I also anticipate pushback from literary circles who may find this approach too structured and formulaic. To them I ask, are you bothered by the rules of the sentence? Is that too constrictive a system for you? Does that not constrain your creativity? Doesn't seem to bother poets any. Nor should elucidating the structure of plot bother you. Rather, it offers a useful framework to build ever more elegant complexity with your eyes open to a framework that may once have only been largely obscure. That's my hope. One thing you might begin to notice when applying this framework, especially if you read in multiple genres, is how different types of stories tend to offer different ways of managing plots. The high-paced plots of suspense novels tend to produce multiple subplots filled with moves and mini-climaxes over the course of a larger global plot. I liken this to a juggler with 4 balls, tossing one ball far into the air while juggling the other 3. The move at the beginning, tossing the 4th ball so conspicuously high, builds suspense for the moment of that ball's re-entry into the cycle, the climax of the global plot. Meanwhile, the juggler handles the balls in hand, the local plots. Another common technique is to finish a chapter with a cue to mystery, leaving the reader compelled to answer the pressing question, propelling the reader further into the narrative faster. Literary fiction, on the other hand, may present only one main plot, slowly developing over the course of a novel, with constraints being few and sometimes not obvious. The target audience here, no doubt, brings a higher level of patience for a slow-burning story and a reader who takes pleasure in the art of the word and a deeper connection to complex characters. A proper job of dissecting a plot, though, without fail in my experience, will yield a fully realized plot with an introduced plot element, constraints on it, and a resolution of sorts, whether actual or implied. Anything less will yield a plot that seems as confusing to the reader as an ungrammatical sentence would. Like all the lessons here, I offer this as a tool. A writer can use this particular tool as a framework around which to build a kernel of a story that may not yet be complete in their mind. Perhaps it needs more constraints for the resolution to seem satisfying. Or perhaps you've written your story and your reviewers are confused by an element because you've inadvertently sent cues for a plot element you didn't intend to develop and therefore never resolved. This is also an incredibly useful tool for learning about other successful narratives similar to the style of stories you're aiming to write. Have at it. I strongly suggest you dissect your favorite stories to see if you can figure out what you love about them. In my case, it hasn't taken any of the magic out of them. If anything, the intricacy I've discovered within the most well-formed plots has left me with far more admiration for the genius of the authors than I ever would have had if I'd remained blind to their plot's inner workings. Thus far, we've discussed plot, mostly to the exclusion of character. Next, we'll cover two types of plots that depend on the motivations of characters, dilemma, and conflict. We'll build a useful framework for thinking about how characters interact with each other and their inner selves.